don't have it. Yeah, it's slash user slash data forget.
Is it? I don't know.
Data. Data.
So right click.
Well, like the three dot click.
Oh, nice.
Nope.
And then you
Here.
We lose our soul,
Put on meetup.
the spirit of things. We lose our soul, put our trust in things.
Yeah, it is there. I'm just trying to.
The things that fade away. Let me keep coming back, 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 keep coming back. Of things we know. you make me wanna talk back to you. Say it like that. If I hate you, then find someone new. Baby, but you know I never will. No, so I choke you down just like a pill. You like a pill. Am I feel you like a pill to get my fill. No, do me in the worst way. Don't let me sleep. Never say you're sorry. Oh, maybe I'll leave. Baby, but you know I never will. No, so I choke you down just like a pill. You like a pill. Get my things.
Up here, we're free, bound only by frozen memories. Lost in time, racing on these broken dreams.
hold it, like, not hold this.
Everybody, can I have your attention, please? Hello. Thank you all so much for coming on such a beautiful summer day. I know we were all out, but I do apologize. I know Data for Good has been really busy, so we haven't been able to host a Datathon this year yet, but that does not mean it's not coming anytime soon. Thanks, guys, for being here. I know this is our first event of the year. It's definitely not the last. Just to give you guys a few brief updates. First of all, we do have an updated website, which is finally online. Yes, thank God. Also, we have new chapters starting. So far we have chapters in Calgary, Toronto, yeah, Montreal, Ottawa, Edmonton. We have one in Vancouver now. We have 2 more coming. I cannot officially say till they're official. So we are growing, and there is a lot of interest in data science around Canada. So thank you guys so much, and thank you the data science community, because you guys are actually doing something for good this year. I also want to embarrass Victor and Joy for 2 minutes by telling them they're the ones who are right there who co-founded this organization. So thank you so much. Can I request you all to please give them a big round of applause? Yeah, I know, I'm going to hear about it after. Okay, that's fine. I did want to say a few things. First of all, Rangel, thank you so much for hosting us. We really appreciate this. And we always love our community partners who support us like this. We also have, we have more stuff coming in. One of the reasons why we've been a little behind is because it's just a few people and there's a lot of work we have, and we have more projects in place. So for example, things like open data, Twitter analytics to see what sort of sentiment analysis we can do. We are even partnering up with some of the corporate entities, because even they are willing to, in some cases, give their data, obviously after anonymizing it. So we have a lot of things going on. We do need some volunteer help, however, especially data ambassadors, because before data can be analyzed, I'm sure you understand that it needs to be put in a format that it's ready to be analyzed. So if you guys are able to help, and by the way, we only ask for 1 hour a week if we do ask any volunteer for any volunteer. So if you are able to help, please touch base with me or message us, or you can even touch base with us through our Facebook or Meetup, whichever way. Please do touch base with us. Other than that, I can't think of any other updates. But if you do have any questions about Data for Good, please, you can always reach me through my Meetup group or the Meetup group that we have, or just on Facebook even, or Twitter. We are looking for some social media people help as well. I know we get a lot of data scientists, right? But me, myself, being a data scientist, I can't do social media too well. So if you do know of anyone, please do let me know. With that being said, tonight's talk is from Heather. Heather, thank you so much for being here. Heather's been traveling a lot these days. So I really appreciate the fact that she's been able to take this time out. I'll actually let her tell you where she's been traveling. She's been doing a lot of interesting projects from Africa and Washington, D.C. I'll let Heather talk about it. So Heather, there you go. Thank you so much. Big round of applause for her, please.
I don't need that mic. I'm mic'd. I have the Madonna mic. Hi, thanks for having me. Before I do anything else, let's just see if I can work this. How do can you get my slides to come up?
This one? Oh, push start on the left. So we go here. Oh, wait. Which one is this? Oh, sorry.
All right, we're good. Okay. Hi, thank you for having me. And hi to everybody that's watching us on the web. I know we have a number of Facebook people and live stream people, so it's nice to meet you on the camera. And all of you came out to Toronto in what may be our first truly nice evening of the summer. So thank you for being here. We'll keep it short and snappy so you still have time for your patio. And this is a really diverse group of people. I know there's data scientists here, there's designers here, there's civic tech people, there are just citizens who think data might be good to learn about. So I'm going to try and kind of mix it up in this talk and have some technical details and have some storytelling, more about what I do, and then I'll make sure we leave lots of time at the end for questions. So if one part gets boring, don't worry, we'll move on. So I'm Heather. And I own a company. I own a company called DataSyst. And what we do is we focus on providing data science on an as-needed basis to the social sector. So we have a lot of different projects happening at the same time. We don't just work on one topic or in one area or in one kind of science. We really get to play in everybody's backyard, which we feel really lucky about. And we make sure that any data and any analysis that we do gets turned into a story, gets turned into something that's meaningful to the person who needs to understand it. And I learned this the hard way. This is essentially how I got into data science for the social sector. Is starting out as a recent, after I did my grad work in stats, ended up working on a project in rural Bangladesh that needed a lot of really advanced statistical stuff. I did a lot of great work in R, some work in Python, felt so good about the models I ran, then figured out that none of the people I was working for had a clue what I was doing, could not use the results, could not even understand it. So that really changed my life. In that moment, founded DataSyst and started making it my mission to merge kind of high-end statistical science with real-world uses. So that's what we do. And our company is really unusual. I'm the founder and I'm still the owner. And we're an entirely remote company. We don't have an office anywhere in the world, and yet we work everywhere in the world. And we're entirely project-based. So we don't have a corporate sponsor or one kind of person or organization that we work for. We work for as many organizations as possible on an as-needed basis. So any one time, I'm employing between maybe 15 and 40 data scientists and a slightly smaller number of computer scientists, designers, artists, user experience designers, as many different designers that I can get my hands on, and that kind of thing. So it's a very unusual company. I live in Toronto, but the office is in the world. And this is my very, very favorite photo from my professional career. So this is two young women in rural Bangladesh on a project that we were doing to help a nonprofit organization working in Bangladesh help them understand what was and was not working in terms of getting more milk out of cows. Bangladesh has a very large population and imports a gigantic amount of milk, even though if all the cows in Bangladesh were producing milk at their optimal level, they would not have to import milk. So this nonprofit was trying to figure out what did and did not work in terms of getting more milk out of these cows. Of course, that's a very simplified version of a complicated project, but they wanted me to do the analysis. And this is what data looks like in rural Bangladesh. So this is not data that you can get off somebody's cell phone. It's not MasterCard data that you can save 1/1,000,000th of a second on by processing faster and getting the trade done better. This is data that's being collected from women in rural Bangladesh that do not speak any language. I mean, they speak, but they do not read and write in any language. And we're trying to help them understand how to collect data. So this just takes the data science and puts it in the social sector in a really real way. This is why it is a whole other ballgame. This is the heart of data science in the social sector. We're collecting data on a very large pieces of paper through pictures, and it is probably the most meaningful and important data I've ever worked with. This is data in the social sector. and that is what you have to come back to every time you're trying to do an analysis. Other places that we have worked or are working, we're working with John Englander, who is very concerned about the sea level rise. He's a geologist, a climate scientist, and he is much more concerned about sea level rising than any other form of climate change, and he's a really great guy, and we're working with him to help figure out what we can and cannot understand with data about sea level rising and the meaning of uncertainty in an area where there is a ton of uncertainty. And this is a project that I just recently completed. I just recently did 9 months as the head data scientist for the Ontario Syrian Refugee Resettlement Secretariat. So we had to figure out how to work with data to understand how to make being a refugee coming to Ontario the best possible experience. And that's hard to do with data, and how to figure out moving forward for the next 10 years, for the next 12 years, how do we optimize this experience? This is another kind of problem that we work with in data science. In my spare time, as my hobby, I work as a data journalist. So that's also data in the social sector. This is an article I did for 538. Nate and I got to know each other back when he was with the New York Times. And so I do some freelance work in the data journalism sector, and I was talking to some of you before this talk, and it's a really good place to learn how to tell stories that matter. Nobody has to read a piece of journalism, and if you want to get across a story, you have to tell it in a way that's meaningful and impactful. Another thing we do, in addition to working with governments and nonprofits, is we work in the, I think this would be called maybe the civic tech sector, although I'm not entirely sure. There's people here who can help me understand. But we work with, this is an example of working with the Knight Foundation to build a web tool to help people crowdsource data more effectively. One of the problems with crowdsourced data is that it's very biased. It's never representative of anybody other than the people that answered the survey. So we're building weighting tools that automatically weight things based on demographic baseline population data that are free and open source, and journalists can use them, communities can use them. And this is an example that we're doing with the Knight Foundation called Weighing the Wisdom of the Crowd. So we're here to talk tonight about what's the difference between doing data science in the social sector versus the corporate sector. And the first thing we have to start with is, why does anyone in the social sector need data? One of the most important things that you have to keep in mind is that very few people get into the nonprofit sector because they love data. I know that this room is the exception, but most people get in the social sector because they want to help somebody. They want to work on homelessness. They want to feed somebody. And so they're not that excited about collecting data at first. And it's our job, as the people who are excited about collecting data in the social sector, it's our responsibility to get them excited. It's not our responsibility to be mad at them that they don't have data, or mad at them that they're not using the data right. It is our responsibility to get them excited, because we're already excited. We're the ones that see the value. So why do they need data? Why do we in the social sector need data? Fundraising and marketing, grant writing, planning, and impact assessment. These are the four this is not exclusive, there are other reasons, but these are the four basic categories that people in the social sector use data. Datacists, and so me and my team, we work in all these areas, but the most common thing we do is this bottom thing, we do impact assessment. What impact assessment is trying to help people understand, is all your hard work having an effect? And if so, who specifically is it helping? And how could you optimize your work to have it help either more people or different people or a more diverse set of people. The reason that people in the social sector need data can be divided into two distinct concepts: prediction and causal analysis. And this is the basis of what we're going to talk about tonight. Prediction and causal analysis are very, very different things, and you really need to understand which one you're doing when you're working with data. I kind of regret calling the talk prediction versus causal analysis because it's not a zero-sum game, it's not a war to the death. We're going to have both. You just need to know which one you're doing. Essentially, this is, again, oversimplified, but if you're doing prediction, you're basically trying to figure out what happened or what will happen. If you're doing causality, you're trying to understand why it happened or why it will happen, which are two very different questions. For example, DataSys has worked with a social sector organization that wanted to optimize their use of subsidized housing. So they had a lot of data from the past about who had used subsidized housing, what their sociodemographics were, and what the results were. Did they stay in subsidized housing? Did they leave? Did they graduate to non-subsidized housing? What did they do? However, if we built a standard machine learning predictive algorithm for this data, we would have gotten a very racist result. Reason being that our training data was racist data because it was coming from a racist society. So for example, it would be more likely, this was not a Toronto-based organization, it would be more likely, our predictive algorithm would tell us, don't give that subsidized house to a single black mom. She's much more likely to not pay her rent, or she's much more likely to drop out. Reason being is that the data that produced that algorithm is being collected from a society that's very racist, very misogynistic. And so you're going to recreate the very society that you're trying to improve if you're building predictive algorithms based on this data. Let's look at another example. So we work with the UNHCR, that's the High Commission for Refugees, and they're trying to understand what helps refugee children adjust to new schools. So we've worked with teams of researchers, and we've also worked with a bunch of data journalists for this project. It's a very widespread and interesting project. And it's very efficient from sort of a data mining, predictive analytics point of view to throw many, many, many variables into this model, sort of using the big data paradigm, and then getting out a probability. Well, this child is this % likely to integrate successfully into this school. Problem is, if we throw all these variables in, mother's education, how poor their family is, the birth order of the child, the weeks that the child spent in the refugee camp, whether or not that child is taking languages, and then contextual variables like, is the school system ready for refugees? If we throw all these variables into the model, we're going to get a pretty efficient model that does a good job at predicting. However, it's not useful in any way. All we can say is, oh yes, if you look at these 50 variables, you can predict, but it's very confusing to anybody who needs to use the results on the ground, and it's almost impossible to apply in real life. And it clouds the real drivers of success. If you say these 50 things are working together, so what? And what we need is not to predict whether or not that kid's going to do well in school, but to figure out how we can help that kid do better in school. Email fundraising campaigns is the last example I'll talk about. Similar refugee organization, not the same one, not the Ontario government, wanted to be able to tell which one of their email campaigns were working the best. It's very common for nonprofits and governments in the social sector organization. A predictive algorithm can tell you how many people donated after or subsequent to the campaign. A predictive model cannot answer the question of how many people who would not have normally donated after that campaign still donated. There could be many other variables that aren't in your predictive model. So prediction is able to tell you what, causality is able to tell you why. They're both important, they're both valuable. I don't want to look like I'm against prediction. So I'm going to share two great examples of prediction being used in the social sector before I go on to talk a lot more about causality. This is an amazing piece of data science that's just been worked on in Mexico. There's drug wars going on in Mexico, and so much so that the national death rate in Mexico looks like it might be, I mean, the national life expectancy in Mexico looks like it might be dropping as a result. These data scientists and journalists worked together and scraped a ton of data and were able to identify which counties in Mexico had mass graves in them, and then use that algorithm to be able to predict with almost 100% accuracy which other counties in Mexico might have mass graves in them and then did have mass graves in them. And they're very clear. That's not telling you why. That's not going to solve the problem, but it is going to be a good step in the right direction in terms of finding the patterns. These guys down at the Atlanta Journal did an amazing job of scraping literally tens of thousands of records about doctors in the United States and matching them, use machine learning predictive algorithms to match doctors with disciplinary action and then subsequent practicing, and found out that there was a huge proportion of doctors in the United States, they did this nationally, that were being disciplined for sexual abuse and then starting up their practices again. That never would have been found without predictive analytics. So predictive analytics are great. However, prediction can go very badly in the social sector if your question is a causal question. So this is a really simple example about, can we predict how to improve life expectancy? So this is real data, and that is on the horizontal axis, cigarette consumption per capita and of adults, and the horizontal axis is life expectancy. So we run this through R, I use a lot of R, Python, whatever, and we get a highly significant result. And you know, this is a real trend. What does this actually mean? This means that 1 cigarette per year adds this number to your life. So what does that really mean? That means all it takes is 4 cigarettes a day to add 10 years to your life. That is a very successful, highly relevant, very big R-squared predictive analytic.
Smoke what you got.
Yeah. A good statistician, though, will look at this and say, that's ridiculous. This is clearly not a linear relationship. There's curvature in this relationship. Okay, so now we build a fancier predictive algorithm, and we find out that it's closer to 5 cigarettes a day. That's really, really optimal. It's not 4. This is why we have to be worried about predictive analytics answering causal questions. This predictive algorithm is correct. This is what's important to know, that this is not bad statistics. This is a good model. It works perfectly. It's very, very predictive. The p-values are great. The R-squareds are great. The coefficients are fine. The problem is that it's a predictive algorithm being used to answer a causal question. And a lot of data science in the social sector runs into this problem because a lot of people know how to do predictive analytics, and so if we have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. For example, we have recidivism algorithms that predict that black men are most likely to reoffend. So if a judge is using an algorithm that helps that judge decide whether or not to allow an offender to get parole, and he or she is using an algorithm that is based on biased data being run through a predictive algorithm, not a causal algorithm, the black men who are already being discriminated against are going to be discriminated against again. Educational value-added algorithms regularly fire some of the best teachers. Value-added algorithms are predictive, and they track how much the students improved, and they attribute that to the teacher, and it's very problematic because sometimes the best teachers are, in fact, given the most challenging children because they are the best teachers. Even the first iteration of Google Flu, who have some of the best data scientists in the world, tell us that when there's a lot of high school basketball games, there's going to be a lot of flu. It's because it's a winter predictor. High school basketball happens in the winter in the United States. I don't even know if we have high school basketball in Canada. So this is where social sector analysis needs a different type of data scientist for many of the questions. So if you want to do data science in the social sector, it's really important. Every time you touch any kind of analysis, you ask, is this a causal analysis or is it a predictive analysis? Okay, causal analysis is when we're basically interested in understanding the average treatment effect or the average treatment effect on the treated. So there's some group of people who have been exposed to something, and you want to understand what effect that had on them, whether they were exposed to an email campaign, whether they were exposed to fleeing their country and ending up in Canada, whether they were exposed to a project that was designed to help their cows get more milk. You want to understand how that affected them. The problem arises when we try and compute the quantities, so computing the average treatment effect becomes a problem because we never have two identical people being exposed to the opposite things. So you don't have two of the same 9-year-old girl, one of who gets to stay in Syria and one of who gets to travel through a refugee camp and then ends up in Ontario. If you had two identical girls, you could look at the one, look at the other, and that would give you a causal effect. But we never have that. You have that with green beans, but you don't have that with people. Let's say that we want to understand the relationship between two things. A young person who participates in recreation and the health of that young person. This is a map that we made for a group in Peel that we're trying to understand. Peel is an area just west of here that we're trying to understand the relationship between kids that participated in their recreation programs and the health of those kids. Does recreation really help kids, or is it just helping the parents feel better? It's a legitimate question. So we're looking at participation in recreation. Is it related? And we were able to say yes. Yes, it's definitely related. But what we wanted to say was participation in recreation is causing improved health in kids. We want to say that X is causing Y. But all we know is X is related to Y. Right? So a change in X is going to involve a change in Y. If a kid participates more, their health goes up. Maybe it's that way. X causes Y. Could be that this is happening through a mediating factor. So X is causing M, and M is causing Y. So an example of that is it's not actually the child participating in recreation that's causing the improvement in health. It's the child is participating in recreation, which means that that child's BMI is going down. And the change in BMI is causing the change in health. Or it could be that Y is causing X. It could be that the kids who are healthy are more likely to participate in recreation. Or it could be what's called a confounding factor, which is Z is causing X and Y. Maybe the rich kids in this neighborhood are both healthier and more likely to participate in recreation. So that's called a confounding factor. And if you have a confounding factor, which in this picture is called Z, hello to all our American friends, it's called Z. I can say that because I'm an American. If Z is known and measurable, like income might be, then you can measure it and you can include it in a model and you can control for it. If Z is known but very hard to measure, you can probably run something called an SEM, and a structural equation model, and you can probably take it into account. Most of the time, Z is completely unknown. Then it's very hard to know what to do with it. How do you know, if you have a relationship between X and Y, that X is actually causing Y, or that there's some invisible hidden Z that you've never even thought about that's causing both? Then if Z is in a is constant in each cluster, you can usually run longitudinal models. So if you think that the Z in this case, if you think income is causing both participation and health, you can get clusters of kids that all have the same income, and you can run a model that way. Thing that you never have to forget in doing data science is that there's always a chance that chance is causing all of it. That it's all just chaos, and we're just telling stories like the constellations in the sky. We're just hoping that any of this is real or true. So you've got to remember that in data science. And the fifth, which is really common in the social sector, is the selection process. Maybe you just have, you selected kids who you found at the YMCA. And maybe those kids are going to be really different than the general population. So in order to do this, in order to say that X is causing Y, that in fact participation and recreation is causing the change in health, you need to be able to reject all the other possibilities. You need to be able to reject numbers 2 through 5, which is a lot of work and hard to do, which is why people prefer predictive analysis. But hang in there, it can be done. There's a couple of methodological options. I'm just going to talk about the methodological options at a high level. I'm not going to go into the details of how to do it. It's very late on a weeknight. We all want to go to the patio. But I'm going to give you a menu so that when you're faced with this, you can come back and know what your choices are. And of course, this is not exhaustive. New statistical methods are being developed all the time. I will miss some. I'm talking about a couple that we've used, some that we use a lot, some that we've used a little bit. The most common one that I'm sure you've all heard of is multiple linear regression. You've probably all even done this. It's by far the most common. This is not only for causal analysis, this also works for predictive analysis. If you're doing it for causal analysis, it works really well if your data is experimental. So if you've randomly assigned people to receive the treatment or not, if you have an identical group of kids, some of whom are taking your rec program, some of whom are not taking your rec program, you're going to be much safer doing a linear regression and thinking that you have a little bit of a leg to stand on in terms of saying that X is causing Y. In this, you can add specific intercepts for, say, rich kids and poor kids, and you can control for confounders as well. We use this, we work extensively in South Sudan. We're not allowed to go there anymore, but we still work there remotely. And they have community medical workers. And these are unpaid people, usually women, but not always women. And it's their job, essentially, to caretake the health of the communities that are experiencing basically a human catastrophe in South Sudan right now. And so we're doing some A/B testing to see what works most effectively as a motivator for these women. They're not allowed to be paid, long, complicated story, but they are allowed to be given food. They are allowed to be given badges of like social recognition, a special uniform and a badge. And they're also allowed to be given access to specialized health products. So we're working to say which one of those three works the best. So that's causal analysis. We can't just do predictive analysis, causal analysis. And in this case, we were able to get experimental data, and we are using multiple linear regression. Another tool that works really well in the field is hierarchical linear mixed effects models. And I actually shouldn't necessarily put the word linear in there, because you can do these non-linearly or also semi-parametrically. They do not have to be linear. These are better if your data is observational. And I mean better than multiple linear regression if your data is observational. They allow you to have a lot of randomness, a lot of random intercepts and random effects for different things you want to control for. These are very good if you're collecting data over time. So if you're collecting data over time, you need to account for that. So if you're collecting data from me over time and one of you over time, you can't just throw all that data into a pot, because the data points that are from me are going to be more like each other than the data points that are from you. So you have to take that into account, that the data has a different kind of a structure if it's being collected over time. And this also allows you to control for the confounders, like is the kid in the rec program rich or poor? An example of this is we're doing this with the Syrian Refugee Secretariat because we have data over time and we definitely have data in clusters. But it's not experimental because you can't, it's very unethical to assign randomly which refugee has what experience. It's just not a good idea. Propensity score matching is a very, very good tool to have in your belt if you're going to do data science in the social sector. There's a lot of packages that can help you do propensity score matching in almost every statistical language that I'm aware of, at least. And essentially, the advantage here is that it allows for some nonlinearity. And it allows you to control for, in theory, for a lot of the variables that you can't measure. So a lot of those Zs, a lot of the confounders that you just don't have any data on. You don't know what might be actually causing or controlling the relationship between X and Y. So if you don't know, a good thing to do is propensity score matching. Essentially, in a nutshell, what this does is it takes your data and it then uses a statistical model to estimate the probability of a person having the experience or not having the experience. And so if you had a bunch of kids, some of who had been in your rec program, some of who were not in your rec program, but they were not randomly assigned, their parents just got to put them in or not, whatever the parents wanted to do or the kid wanted to do, you would get a probability. You would build a statistical model that gave you the probability, the chance that that child went to rec or not, based on as many different variables as you can get. This is one of the examples where you do throw all the variables into the pot. And then you take that probability and you put it on the other side of the equation, on the other side of the algorithm, and you use that probability kind of as a control. There's a couple of different algorithms. You can use k nearest neighbor, radius matching, stratification matching, super technical stuff. There's lots and lots and lots of tutorials on it online, but this is a really, really good tool to use. There are, like everything on the internet, there are wars about it. Some people love it, some people hate it. I found it to be very, very useful. We used it in Pakistan. We helped the Pakistan government and MEDA, which is the Mennonite Economic Development Association based out in Waterloo. We helped them conduct a labor force survey of young people in Pakistan because they don't have a labor force survey the same way that we do, and they have a very, very intense youth unemployment problem. So we wanted to do a labor force survey, and as part of doing that labor force survey, we needed to do some propensity score matching to find out how likely it was that somebody would be unemployed based on a variety of variables. So it's a very good tool. It's very useful in the field. Instrumental variables, you've probably heard about this if you have a softer science background. They're used a lot in the psychology sector, things like that. But they're also very helpful in the field. So instrumental variables are best if you have a lot of unmeasurable confounding factors. So if you think there's a lot of things that are probably in the way of your relationship that you're trying to estimate, but you can't collect the data on them. Essentially, you have to find a variable that's related to your X variable, so related to your predictor or your covariate, depending on your, whatever terminology you're using, that does not have an independent effect on your outcome variable. So this is a variable that's related to whether or not a child goes to rec, in our example, but is entirely unrelated to whether or not that child has a change in health. It's a little complicated to get at first, but if you just think about it later tonight on your walk home, it'll start to make more sense, because then you can use that as a form of randomization. So the problem is that you have all this data that isn't random. So the kids that have gone to rec are going to be different than the kids that haven't gone to the kids that have gone to rec are going to be different than the kids that have gone to rec in ways that you don't understand, the ways that you can't control. And so if you want to be able to say, yes, recreation is causing a change in health, you have to find a way to control for all those hidden variables that are going to be in the way of your relationship. And one of the ways is to find a variable that's related to your ex, that's related to the fact that you did or did not go to rec, but is not related to health. And you can kind of use that as a pretend randomizing variable. We did this in Bangladesh. This is our example that we're using here is we have worked in Bangladesh for over a decade. It's one of our very favorite places in the world. If you ever get a chance, I highly recommend it. And we're using it in that dairy value chain project that's still going on to help increase the output of cows. Control functions are unusual, and they're being used less now. People who like control functions are kind of going towards Bayesian analysis, which is a whole other thing. We should probably do a whole meetup on Bayesian analysis in the social sector. But essentially, control functions came out of econometrics. So it's a kind of a fancy way to take your underlying expert theory that estimates the probability of this happening and then uses that estimate as a predictor variable. So you're basically very similar to Bayesian. You're kind of creating a prior probability that this relationship exists and then including that in your variable. Last one we're going to talk about is very common. I'm sure you've heard of it, difference in differences. It's kind of a fancy form of regression where you need data over time. The more data you have, the better. I don't think 2 points in time will do it. I don't think this is a before and after. We've never used it for before and after anyway. I don't think it would work. And that way you can control for the trends that are happening in your person of interest, as well as the trends that are happening in all of the contextual groups and society around them, and see what the difference is. So that's why it's a difference in difference. So this is the list. This is the slide you should take a photograph of if you want to take your menu home. But again, please don't yell at me on the internet. I know this is not an exhaustive list. I know that there are other things you can do. And I know that each of these things have pros and cons. It's just a menu, just like any other menu. However, this last thing we're going to talk about is probably the most important thing we're going to talk about. Regardless of which method you use, you need to think when you're doing causal analysis about mediation and confounding. So this is why it doesn't work to just throw all the variables you have into the right side of your equation and predict something out on the left side of your equation. In causal analysis, you have to think about mediation and confounding. So mediating variables must not be included in your model because they will squash the effect and hide it from you. Confounding have to be included in the model because without them, you'll think there's an effect when there isn't. So if you include a mediating variable in a model that says, yes, X causes Y, your p-value will be high. It looks like your X is not causing Y. When in fact, X is causing Y, you just have a mediating variable in there. If you leave out a confounding variable, it'll look like, yeah, my p-value is really low, everything's great, X is causing Y, when in fact, no. Your confounding variable is causing both X and Y, it's just not in your model. Now here comes the rub. There's no data mining, data science, statistical technique in the world that can tell you whether a variable is a mediator or a confounder. You have to talk to the experts, it's conceptual. So this is where you need to understand. When I was first coming here this evening, as Saad mentioned, I travel widely, and the reason I travel widely is that I don't want to have any project going on in a country or in an area of a country that I haven't been in, because you have to understand exactly what context the data is coming from, the context that the people who are collecting the data are coming from. I once had an experience where I got a data set that had a variable in it that was called gender of the learning group. People were organized into learning groups. These learning groups were doing different things and causing different outcomes. And the learning groups turned out to be very, very important in the causal analysis. And we had a variable called gender of the learning group. It was in all the models. It was working really well. And then we go to the ground. We get on the ground. And I'm visiting these groups, and I have my clipboard. This was before we were all hauling around iPads. Not an Apple commercial. Surfaces are fine or whatever it is. I just happen to have an iPad. And we're looking at these groups. And so I have a group, that's the group gender is all female. And I'm looking at this group, and it's clearly got men in it. So I say to one of the people, the field team who's collecting the data, this is weird. This group says it's all female, but it's looking like it's mixed gender. And the guy says to me, oh, the gender of the group is not the gender division of the group. It's who the data collector thinks is doing the most work. And so that's the kind of thing that if you're just letting anybody give you any kind of data, you're just going by variable names and you're just running models, the results that you are giving to people that change people's lives, that determine whether or not they get a cow, that determine whether or not they get out of jail, that determine whether or not they leave that refugee camp in Jordan, are going to be wrong, right? So you have to spend a lot of time thinking about the conceptual framework of what the question you're trying to answer is, and really understanding where exactly did that data come from. That's why that first picture of those two Bangladeshi young women with their piece of paper and their pictures, you have to understand exactly how that data came to be and what it's actually measuring, and whether these variables are mediators or confounders. And that's why it takes forever. It's a long, slow process. We are not cutting off 1/1,000,000th of a second on a trade with beautiful data that comes in every day from our Bloomberg machine. Like, this is not that. So this is a little picture, mediators, confounders. So we're trying to say, does X cause Y? A mediator is kind of how X is causing Y. And there's a lot of mediators out there. And if you include the mediator in the equation, it will look like X is not causing Y. Or it will give you the wrong amount that X is causing Y. A confounder down here at the bottom is causing both X and Y. If you don't include a confounder, you will get, again, a wrong equation. Now, sometimes if you're doing really advanced analysis and you understand your model and you've worked it all out, sometimes for specific reasons you may want to include a mediator or not include a confounder. But in order to do that, you really need to know what you're doing. You really need to have thought about it. Which of these is a mediator, which of these is a confounder? An example is maternal poverty and low birth weight babies, which we were working on. And this was actually one of the ways that we learned all of these things I'm talking to you about today. Nobody told me. I just learned the hard way. I just learned by making mistake after mistake after mistake. And this is one of them. So we know for sure that maternal poverty is associated with low birth weight babies. There's a million research projects about this. There's a lot of data. It's true. However, if you're in the social sector and you want to do something about that, you need a causal pathway. So why are those two things related? So in our example, we were pretty sure that diet is a mediator. So that's the purple thing up here. So if we have, gotta stay behind the table for the tech guy. If we have maternal deprivation causing low birth weight babies, we're pretty sure that a mediator is diet. So maternal deprivation is causing a less nutritious diet, which is causing lower birth weight babies. So if you control for diet in your algorithm, you are going to suppress the effects of maternal deprivation on low birth weight babies. It's not going to look like a very big deal. It's like, no, that's not causing it. When in fact it is. You just have the wrong variable in your model. Age is a confounder. So age is down here. Age is causing both. Mother is more likely to be poor if she's younger. What that says about our society is a whole other conversation, but that's the way it is right now. And low birth weight babies are also more likely to be born to very young mothers. If you don't include the mother's age, then you're going to get an incorrect relationship. Now here, ethnicity is both. It's maybe just one, or maybe it's neither. Ethnicity could be a mediator, because maybe physically different ethnicities have different weights of babies. Ethnicity could also be a confounder because maybe we live in a society that treats young women of different ethnicities, or I shouldn't say young women, women of different ethnicities differently. And this is the only way that you'll ever make a decision is to consult with experts, understand where your data is coming from, and then whenever you build, whichever model you build, you have to be extremely explicit about what you did. And this is the final thing I'll really say about data science in the social sector, is that it has to be transparent. I understand that algorithms are hard and that they're very expensive to build, and that many people, whether they're in a social sector organization or a corporate organization, want to hold their algorithms close to them and say, no, it's a black box. You know, you give me your data, I'll give you results. If you have a black box algorithm, whichever decisions you make about what's a mediator and what's a confounder are completely unknown to the people that want to use your results. I would not use the results of an algorithm to make any kind of a policy decision, any kind of investment decision for a nonprofit, any kind of a programming decision, if you don't understand have the transparency in the black box. We have to find a way as data scientists working in the social sector to come to some kind of an agreement that we are going to share these algorithms, because it's been shown over and over again. I didn't make this stuff up. These algorithms frequently are shown to be racist, sexist, misogynistic, just incorrect. And not because people are trying to make them that way, because it takes a lot of people looking at an algorithm. So they really need to be made transparent. The algorithm needs to be transparent. If you're going to do data science for good, you need to know whether you're making a predictive model or a causal model, and what are the implications for each. You need to think carefully about your moderators, your mediators, and your confounders. And you have to be willing to make your algorithm transparent. You don't have to make the data transparent. I know data privacy is a big deal. I'm not saying that everybody's private data should be made transparent. The data can remain proprietary. The algorithm has to be transparent in the social sector if you want us to make human being decisions based on it. And if you just run algorithms without thinking about these things, you will very likely perpetuate racism, sexism, all kinds of isms, advise advocacy groups that you really care about to waste their money, implement public policy that's actually a barrier to true civic action. This is where you can reach me. I live in Toronto. I travel extensively all the time, but I am here, and I think this is a great group. Please don't use my Twitter or my email to yell at me. I am a human being. There are all kinds of flaws here. This is just my idea from my experience, and it's been a real honor to be here, and I think we have plenty of time for questions. I think they want you to use these.
Okay, sorry. All right, I'm just going to get up and give you the mic if you have a question. Well, my first question actually is, given the fact that you're dealing with third world countries and the kind of places you're dealing with, wouldn't there be, okay, do you even trust the data that you're getting or the survey data that you're getting from the field, basically? I mean...
First of all, I would say that emerging economies have no worse data than many Canadian or United States companies.
Really?
Of course. That it's certainly not across the board. One of my experiences actually is that sometimes working with data in the emerging world like Bangladesh or Tanzania is, how should I say, sometimes people there are more committed to getting it right because they are watching their children die.
Oh.
Whereas here there's a lot more luxury to get it wrong or fight about different things. And
Disagree with that. I'm from a third world country.
and
I went in I wanted to implement a new water safety protocol for my country. When I spoke to the guys in Parliament, my good friend who was in there said to me, I can take your ideas. Hey, so I'm from Trinidad.
Yeah.
When I came in, I did my undergraduate at Brock, and then I did a research assistantship with Dr. Mohammed Dour on ward safety protocols in Canada. So I took the research and I
Right.
said, oh, it'd be very interesting if I could then implement ward safety protocols in my country, because I know that it'll help introduce the right amount of filtration techniques that would
Right.
allow for cleaner water. And then I could then go across to the Caribbean and then help out the other islands. When I went in and I spoke to my colleague, who's a good friend of mine, who I grew up with, he said, Matt, it's not fine, well and good, but then when you go in, what's going to happen is this. The government's going to take your idea, they're going to botch it, they're going to screw it up because they want to crop out as much as they want, and then they're going to blame a fall guy, and that guy's you.
Right.
So I mean, like, personally, I could say that I couldn't, as much as I want to help my country, I can't, because
Right.
unless I come in with an organization that's outside from like a philanthropic organization and then implement it because of money, I'm definitely not gonna be able to help my country.
I don't disagree with you in any way. What I'm about to say is not a reflection on my work with the Ontario Public Service. But the same thing frequently happens in Canadian governments as well, is what I'm saying.
Oh, definitely.
Yes.
I mean, but based on his question, it's not fair to say that in the emerging worlds, because I was part of the UN as well,
Oh, that's
and then
great.
going across and speaking with a few of the other countries
Yeah.
and their delegates, they do have their own form of, I guess, misrepresentation of data, depending on who it is. I mean, the real question is how many
Absolutely.
times do you sample
Right.
across different people such that hopefully you
Right.
gather the correct
Yes.
set.
I agree with you. I don't think that's exclusively a developing world problem. I think that you have good data and questionable data coming out of organizations across the world. You have some great organizations in sub-Saharan Africa, and you have some shoddy organizations in Manhattan, and vice versa.
Definitely.
I think they both exist in both. I think it's very hard to generalize.
No, definitely.
Yeah.
I have one more question, actually, last one. Does anybody else have a question first before? Oh, okay, I guess I'll have to hold on to mine. Okay. Had a hand, oh.
I was just curious, what tests do you employ to check to see whether your models are underspecified, so missing certain variables that may be critical?
Yeah, it really depends on the situation that we're in. I think probably we do that mostly during the auditing process. So that usually comes in the middle of cleaning the data, auditing the data in general, then building kind of exploratory models, then auditing models, then model selection. So in the auditing process and the model selection process is when we would check for not enough data or not enough variables or too many variables. And in terms of what tests we use, it really depends on which model we're using, but we do a lot of work with Poisson. But it really varies. Hi.
Hi. Very interesting talk. Thank you so
Thanks.
much for that.
Thank you.
I had a question around, you segregated like predictive models and causality-based models, and
Yeah.
the example you use with the, single black women as, if you use it as a prediction model, you're going to get racist results. I mean, my take on that is, if you get those racist results using a predictive model, then you apply your judgment to kind of understand why that group of women is not performing as well as you would want them to, and find the reasons behind it. But the model still is a valid model, and that's the fact of reality. So that's
You're perfectly entitled to that belief. I absolutely. But as soon as you say you're going to take your time to determine why that is and make those changes, you're creating a causal model.
it's still predictive.
But
then
yeah, the cigarettes and life expectancy is also
Right.
predictive.
But I mean,
It's
those
also
are-
a correct model. The only thing is you believe in one and you don't believe in the other. Like there's no difference between those two models
the
other than
cigarette one
worldview.
probably is explained by the fact that as
Yes.
income levels rise, cigarette consumption goes up. So probably that's the confounding factor there, right? So it's not the direct correlation.
It's not the only one. There's many. It's that when you get down to trying to get the correct model there, it's very complicated. But I agree that the model saying that the young black mother shouldn't get the apartment
It's racist, yeah.
is correct and racist. And that's my point, is that you have to be really careful, because if you don't apply exactly what you're saying, if you don't apply your own morality, your own ethics, and you're just going to ship this algorithm to say, here you go, housing ministry, your problem's solved, and nobody sits down and thinks about it, then that's a very big problem. But if you're willing to sit down and think about it and do what I would say is turning that predictive model into a causal model, but yeah, I mean, it's just mincing words. As long as someone pays attention to the assumptions in the model.
In terms of the data behind it, I mean, both the models are literally like the same, right? It's just the fact that you're
Yeah.
putting some human analysis behind it. But
Exactly.
in terms of the math,
That's
it's-
exactly it. That I couldn't have said it better. That's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm trying to say. Causal.
This is a first for us. We have a question from YouTube from the live stream.
Hello, YouTube.
Yeah. I'll just read it exactly how she wrote it. It comes from Michelle Y. Zhu. Very insightful presentation. I believe Heather said she has been involved for at least 10 years. How have your projects evolved over the years?
Great question. Yes, I have been involved for a bit over 10 years. And I would say, that's a great question. The most obvious and probably simplest thing is the digital world. Before, when we first started, every piece of data we collected was collected on paper with a pen. And now every project we try and figure out, is there a way that we can afford to collect this data digitally? Oftentimes there's not. Oftentimes it's still collected with papers and pens, but more and more there is data that's collected digitally. I am of mixed opinion about how good that is. I sort of have nightmares of, everybody who's receiving a Bill and Melinda grant to get more money out of their cows is required to wear a Fitbit that sends the data back. Of course, nothing like that has ever happened that I'm aware of, but I have nightmares about that kind of thing happening. I worry about what the ethical line is for digital data collection for people who are not asking for it necessarily, or who are trading their data for support. I'm worried about that. But I think other than the digital stuff, the other way it's really changed is weird trends in statistical literacy. When I first started working, nobody really cared. Nobody cared. Nobody cared. And it was, my theory is that there was this kind of trend where businesses figured out about business intelligence, and they implemented it, and they figured out that it really improved the efficiency of their businesses. And then these people who own all these businesses essentially are the people that fund these development projects. And so they were like, hey, wait a second, this nice letter we get at the end of the year that shows us this nice little girl that now has food that didn't used to have food isn't really good enough. I need to know my social return on investments. and so this whole kind of industry got moved from business BI over to nonprofit I. And that was a bumpy road. It continues to be a bumpy road, but there's been a really big change in both the level of understanding and the level of expectations on what the social sector produces. And I still think we're in the early days, and we're still learning a lot about what helps and what hurts.
We just have time for a few more questions. Go ahead.
Okay.
Thanks. Thanks for the presentation. That was great. You mentioned at the beginning that on your team you've got a lot of artists, designers, and UX people. Can you say just a little bit about what role they play in the big picture here?
Yeah, sure. Great question. I'm really glad you asked that. And that really is probably the other thing I should say that really has changed in the last 10 years is that it became immediately obvious to us that if you want to write a nice report that looks great to your donor, that has all these p-values and effect sizes and stuff like that, maybe gets published in a journal, that's great. But if you want to understand what factors are really helping rural women in Bangladesh get more milk out of their cows, and you want to explain that to the people who are on the ground in Bangladesh that are running that project, and you want to understand it to the women themselves who are trying to get more milk from their cows, and you want to have that understood by the Gates Foundation project manager who lives and works in Seattle, you cannot produce an academic peer-reviewed journal. You need to produce a whole bunch of different projects. And statisticians, data scientists are not trained. I have tried and struggled, and we rely on our designers from start to finish to make products that will collect the data that we're actually trying to collect, have the questions that we're asking actually get at what we're trying to get at, have the product be pleasant to use rather than, hey, you impoverished woman in Bangladesh, can you please sit down for 2 hours and fill out this thing with a pencil? That the product is a life enhancing, that the act of data collection can be life enhancing rather than just something you have to do to get the proper feed for your cow. All the way through, that's the beginning of the project, all the way through to the end where we're creating a static product that can help people understand what happened, a dynamic product that can help people who are currently still doing the project respond as quickly as possible. The Bangladesh example is a great example. While we were working there, they were having a great deal of hartals, which is physical disruption where we'd be on the ground and the roads would close. And when they have a hartal, the roads close. Like nobody is on the roads for a giant amount of Bangladesh. And what that means for our farmers, in Bangladesh you have 3 hours to get the milk from your cow to a chilling plant. It's very hot in Bangladesh all the time, and running electricity is not a given. And you have 3 hours. If you have all these cows and you've just invested all this money and all this sweat and equity and time into getting more milk out of this cow, and there's a hartal, and your cow now, all this milk is just about to go to waste. So we design interactive, real-time digital things that can help. Okay, if we can't take the milk where it's supposed to go because there's a hartal, where do we take the milk? Where is that milk used? And so that's something where I just cannot overemphasize how great our need for good designers is in all of these aspects, and willingness to do things that are I think data science and data design in the social sector, you have to be willing to do very innovative things. You have to be willing to just make it up as you go along. It's an emergent design. We always say this is an emergent design process, which means we're just making this shit up. So great question. I'm glad you asked that because statistics are not useful if nobody can use them.
Okay, we have time for one more question. So,
hi, great presentation. Thank you. I'm wondering how this work relates to prescriptive analysis, and how is it different from causal analysis? And the example that I was thinking of as you were sort of giving your the different projects you worked on and the issues you had was, if you have a data set that's inherently prejudiced, right? And let's say that's because of the actual facts are prejudiced. So how do you use the data? And let's say you have the data telling you shouldn't give mortgages to a certain population. So how do you use prescriptive analysis to tell you what to do about it? How to make it less racist?
I don't know what prescriptive analysis is, so I'm not sure. That's not a term I've heard. So it's often a terminology issue.
It's coming from BI. It's so descriptive.
Yeah, I'm not a BI person.
Descriptive analysis, it's analysis that tells you what's going on. Predictive analysis tells you what will happen, and prescriptive tells you what you should be doing, knowing what's going on and what will happen. So it tells you what you need to do to change the state of the system or the.
It sounds like prescriptive analysis might be a lot like causal analysis. That's what it sounds like to me. But again, I have quite literally no experience in the business intelligence world, so I apologize. I'm not going to be able to properly answer your question.
Okay, so the question then is, using causal analysis, because you're right, it does sound like causal analysis.
Yeah, it does.
Without without it telling you what you should do, just telling you what the factors are, what the influences. So in a scenario where you have a data set that's inherently prejudiced, how do you use causal analysis to change the system?
Okay, that is where you get into the confounders and the mediators. So the way that you analyze the data, the different methods, some of the methods that I used, that I referenced, are able to kind of use what the analyst believes about the existing prejudices, the structural prejudice that created the data sets, and adjust for that within the models. That's one thing. And then the other thing is to take out the mediators and the moderators that need to be removed in order to, as best you can, control for the prejudice in the model. There's nothing that's going to fix it entirely. And that's where this comment here, you know, you always have to be applying human rationality. But those are the three things that you can do, and nothing will fix it completely. Yeah, which is why we shouldn't run our lives on algorithms ever. Blindly. Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for watching if you're on YouTube.
Heather, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.